Hello, everyone. My name is Yarkın Ergin. I am a PhD student at Rutgers University in New Jersey, United States, and I'm working with Karin Stromswold. Today in this poster, unfortunately, I won't be able to be there in this session, so I'm here recording this brief go-over of the poster for you, and I'll be glad to be in contact with you and answer your questions if you contact me by email or during the conference virtually. Today, the research I'm going to talk about was completed as a part of my master's work also in Rutgers University. And basically, my research topic is the cues that we use for sentence processing. And we can understand sentence processing basically as who is doing what to whom in any given sentence. If you think about it, the job of a listener for any given sentence is trying to understand, trying to map, decipher who is doing what to whom. In English, some cues like word order are very good because the first noun you hear in English is usually the subject of that sentence and likely the agent, the doer of the verb. The case marking, the case system in English only appears in the pronouns. It's only informative for pronouns. For example, if a sentence goes like, I believe him, you know that that means a certain thing. But if a sentence goes like, I believe he, blah, blah, is lying, then you know it has the opposite meaning, and the him, he helps you map what is he, what role he has in these sentences. And also prosody can help you slice up sentences in appropriate places. For example, if I say, when the baby eats, food gets on the floor, that's much more easier than when the baby eats food, gets on the floor. We all know that the second one sounds much off. The stop is at the wrong place. In Turkish, compared to English, the word order is a much weaker cue because Turkish has flexible word order. All 6 word orders are possible when the objects are accusatively case marked, though 70% of Turkish sentences are subject initial. And case marking is a much stronger cue in comparison to English because objects usually have an overt accusative case marker in the form of a vowel, and 80% of objects do have this vowel and 20% of objects do not have this vowel. And when you don't have this overt vowel, the morphological case marking on your object, the only allowed word orders are SOV, subject, object, verb, and OVS, object, verb, subject. And the prosody is at best, the prosody of Turkish is at best little studied, especially given these the scrambled sentences with having and lacking objects. So this allows interesting garden path sentences to appear in Turkish. And by garden path sentences, what we mean is that sentences that make you believe a certain structure, a certain parse is true up until some point where you have to change your idea because the structure is no longer tenable. And what I mean by that is that in Turkish, object initial sentences are possibly confusing like this, and also sentences where there's no case marking on the object, especially OVS sentences that do not have case marking on the object are not disambiguated until the end of the sentence, because if you have a noun verb noun sequence as shown here, that could either be an OVS sentence with no case marking on its object. So the example I have here is the blue is the cat, the black is the verb for bit, and the red word is dog. So cat bit dog, but this sentence actually means the dog bit a cat. This is an OVS where there's no accusative case marker. But it could also be an SVO sentence where there is an accusative case marker on the object, which you hear at the end. So it would again start with the same thing, cat, and then bite, but it will continue with the dog. It will have the final accusative case marker on the dog, which will confirm that the dog is the object. So the cat at the beginning must be the subject. So it's an SVO sentence with an accusative case marker on the object. So our prediction was that because of the confusing or garden pathy nature of unmarked OVS sentences, people will prosodically differentiate between SOV and OVS sentences, and people will also prosodically differentiate between accusatively case-marked and non-case-marked sentences, especially in OVS sentences, given their ambiguous nature. So to test this, we came up with 144 semantically reversible sentences. And by semantically reversible, what I mean is that all the sentences had 2 nouns and a verb. All sentences were 3 words long, and all of the nouns were reversible in that they were both at face value at least equally likely to be the subject or the object of that verb. For example, the example I use here, the man praised the woman. It could have equally been the woman praised the man. It doesn't tell us much about, like, just knowing the nouns doesn't tell us much about who's going to do the praising and who's going to receive the praise. But for example, if I change the sentence with, like, the dog bit the bone, then even if you had just the dog and the bone, that would give you idea about who is going to do what to in this scenario, right? Because there's only so much things can happen with a dog and a bone, but with a man and a woman, they're perfectly semantically reversible, is how we termed it. And also the 2x2 nature of the study is that we had SOV sentences and OVS sentences, and both half of the SOV sentences had a case mark, an overt vowel like case mark on the object, and half of them did not, and same for OVS. We had 9 native Turkish speaking adults read these sentences first and understand them first, and then pronounce them out loud as clear as they can. And we took their recordings and we sliced the recordings using the sound analysis software Prod. And here on the first graph on the bottom left, we can see that on the x-axis, we see that the sentence is being sliced into 50 millisecond bits. You see the time, and each bit, each data point refers to a 50 millisecond chunk collapsed across all the case conditions and all the participants. And on the y-axis is that our measurements were normalized by person. And what that means is that everybody has a different, for example, pitch range, right? Like my voice is a certain height, another person's voice might be lower to start with, another person's voice is higher to start with. For example, I had 5 females and 4 males, and females usually have a higher baseline fundamental frequency pitch than males. So we normalized against each person's person's frequency, meaning that we took the average value for each person and we subtracted that value from each person's score for every condition, which basically just normalized these scores per participant's baseline conditions. And as you can see on this graphic, the OVS sentences rise much earlier than the SOV sentences, and the decline happens much earlier than the SOV sentences, and it's much steeper until they converge at the very end. And if we take a closer look at the case marked and non-case marked versions of the OVS and SOV sentences, first, looking at the OVS, the blue line, the non-marked sentences, the sentences that do not have the vowel accusative case marking on their objects, we can see that on the left side here, that they rise they stay higher. So the standard error bars, the standard errors here refer to the collapsed variation across participants and all 36 scenarios. And we can see that the non-case mark sentences objects stayed, the sentences that did not have a vowel on their objects in OVS stayed throughout higher, and then declined much steeper than the sentences that did have the object when it came to the verb stem part of the sentence, and then they converge at the subject, which is the end of the sentence for OVS sentences. For SOV sentences, we see a similar case where at the object, looking at the slice here, the non-case marked line, the blue line, stays a little bit higher for a couple of points compared to the marked object. And then significantly, crucially, the decline from the object to the verb stem is much steeper and harder for the non-case marked sentence compared to the case marked sentence in SOVs as well. And for statistical analyses, so in these 3 graphics, we saw the x-axis being the timeline without being manipulated. These final 2 graphs here, because objects and verbs and subjects were of a different length, given a particular scenario or a particular item token of the experimental sentences, we took every word and slice them into equal 3 durations, equal thirds durations. So it took the object, took the verb, took the subject for each word order condition, each case marking condition, collapsed across participants and scenarios, and that's what the standard error bars show. And we plotted again the fundamental frequency, in other words, the pitch the normalized fundamental frequency scores. And again, we can see the same pattern where in the blue line, in the non-case marked sentences, the object, all thirds stay higher than the case mark, and then there's a much steeper decline in from the object to the verb in the non-case marked non-case marked sentences in the OBS word order. Similarly, in the SOV word order, at least the last 2/3 are higher than the case mark, and the decline from the non-case marked object to the verb is much higher and steeper than the case marked version in both word order conditions. So in summary, we found that Turkish speakers do prosodically differentiate between SOV and OBS sentences. They also prosodically mark non-case marked objects in both word order conditions with a steeper decline and sometimes a little bit higher, being higher in when the object is not case marked. And our interpretation of this is that since we controlled for the other cues, like the semantics of it, the noun phrases themselves, the context, we didn't have any context, the word order, we manipulated the word order, the morphological cue, which is the vowel itself. When other cues are lacking, we found that our participants provided a prosodic cue as to lead the participants towards the correct syntactic structure to avoid the garden path. Some open questions are listeners able to use these prosodic cues to avoid garden pathing? And we have now ongoing studies. In fact, that's what I'm traveling to collect data on this comprehension study where we're investigating whether Turkish listeners' comprehension is faster and or more accurate for high prosodic sentences, the sentences that have this higher object and then a steeper decline. And we also would like to answer, do speakers consciously or unconsciously provide these prosodic cues? There are preparations in study where we'd like to do comparison of prosody under different conditions. For example, when the participant is speaking to another person versus not. And finally, does the strength of these cues vary depending on the presence of other non-syntactic cues, such as animacy, plausibility, and discourse context? And we have a production study in preparation for that, where these non-syntactic cues prevent possible garden paths, and we're interested in how these interact with the prosodic variation we see in this study. This work was received funds from the Stromswold lab in Rutgers Psychology Department and Rutgers Center for Cognitive Science. So we'd like to thank them. And I'd like to thank you for listening for my I hope it wasn't too long of a presentation. And again, I'm looking forward to interacting with you in the conference. And if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or contact me through the conference's Whova system. And I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.